welcome to African Voices, the second segment of our show today on TrueTalk Africa. I've got three guests today with me. Next to me, John Kamara, Director of Basil Griffith Library. Welcome. And I have Dr. Afua. She is a lecturer at the university and founding director of TrueTalk Africa. Welcome and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Look, I've already talked to the kids on the other side, and I can tell you that it was exciting. These kids know what they're talking about. I'll let you introduce yourself, will you? Yeah, what's your name?
Yelam.
Yelam. Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming. Yeah, great. One thing that I didn't get from the kids, and I guess it's not easy to, I tried not to get from them because of that, I'd get from yourselves, is an understanding of what the impetus, what are the goals of the club. The kids like it, certainly, and I think they're learning quite a lot, not just in terms of academic progress, but general life. They're telling me about America in here.
Yeah.
So why did we set this up?
Okay, so basically the book club is part of TrueTalk Africa Community Interest Company, and the aims of that company is to provide a holistic image or narratives of sub-Saharan Africa so that we can move beyond the one-dimensional perspective of sub-Saharan Africa, which focuses on the lacks or the difficulties or the challenges that the continent has faced and is facing. Instead, what we want to do is present more holistic images of the continent so that we're not denying the difficulties or the challenges, but we're also wanting to recognize the achievements, the contributions, the rich heritage of the continent as well. So that's the idea behind the company as a whole. And for the book club in particular, it's about trying to ensure that children in the UK, Sheffield in particular, are able to read and engage with African literature in the main, especially if it's authored by African writers, to ensure that we're able to tell our own stories and ensure that children in the UK are able to access those stories.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah.
So let's look at how that works in practice. I mean, I talked to the kids. I didn't get much of the sub-Saharan streak, but I got. It was very clear that there's a lot of reading that's done by Africans, both in Africa and in the diaspora.
Yeah.
But John, how does this actually work?
Generally, how it works is that the children will select a book, and we'll do it by popular vote. And after, we'll go away in our own time and we'll read the book, and there'll be different themes within the book that we'll explore. And what my role is to do is to get the conversation flowing and introduce to them what their feelings are towards it and what their perspectives are. And that gives everyone an opportunity to express their own expressions, give their own opinions. And within that also brings forth more conversation on how that relates to today, how that relates to our locality in Sheffield, and how also that relates to the experience of African people or African descent, people of descent in the UK.
Yeah. While we're at that, sometime between 2009 and 2010, I did some research in Rotherham, and I was talking to kids of Asian origin. They were doing a lot of reading of the Quran outside school. One of the biggest complaints was that they are being given a lot of extra work, and it's as if they get out of school to get into another school, and they're feeling like they don't have a life. Other than that, certainly talking to the kids earlier on, I didn't see that they feel like they're doing the back in class, back in that environment, that setting. But how in the long term would you be able to sort of prevent what I think may be a natural drift towards making it feel like a school?
Okay, well, it's actually, hopefully we've designed it so it's kind of, it's inbuilt into the program that it doesn't feel like school. So for example, the kids book club only takes place in the holidays. So we had Easter half term, there'll be one in August, October half term, that kind of thing. And then they have the book, and they have about 6 weeks to read the book.
Right.
So the whole emphasis is that we don't want this to become like school. We don't want it to be additional school, because John's group, for example, consists of secondary school kids, some of whom are getting ready for GCSE exams, and even if they're not, they still have a lot of schoolwork they need to engage with every night and every week. So it's really important that it doesn't become a burden, it doesn't become additional work, and that's why we're going to ensure that it stays in the holidays, and then they have that 6 weeks period to read the book. And if they don't finish the book, it's not a big deal. They just come with what they have read, and then we discuss around the book. And the discussion starts off with the book, but then it goes beyond it. And for the younger children, it's not just about the discussion. They do, they've written their own stories, they've done role plays and stuff like that. So you get them running around and stuff like that. Yeah. So yeah that sounds
it sounds like what the kids were talking about. But let me get back into the what was part of your I think what you said was part of your reasoning for establishing this, which is that you wanted to give these kids some sort of positive understanding of themselves and of the continent they've come out of. Now, talking to the kids earlier on, one of the things I picked out is that there's some understanding of who they are, but they're really understanding themselves as Africans who are in the diaspora, but they're identifying a lot with the challenges that African Americans are facing with policing. And how are we...
how does that come about? Okay, I'm going to let John talk about this, but I will, to introduce it, what needs to be understood is that with the older children, trying to find African-focused books that would interest them is difficult, to be honest. That captures those teenage years was difficult. So we have been more flexible with the secondary school kids. So they've read The Hate You Give, which is probably what they were talking about in that particular group, and they're reading. So with them, they're focusing more on Black-focused stories and narratives. And if we can find an African-focused one, then they will read that. So the last book they read was On the Road to Johannesburg, which was set in apartheid South Africa. But I have to say, getting stories for that age group, which are focused on Africa and written by Africans, is a challenge. It's easier for the younger children and also for the adults, because we have an adult book club as well. But for that age group, there's a gap in the market that somehow needs to be addressed. I'll let John, I don't know if John wants to add anything to that.
Books like The Hate You Give is more of a contemporary fictional story around some of the issues that are facing Americans, young Black Americans, and this usually speaks volumes to children that are based in the UK, because some of the issues are similar to some extent. Books like these are easier for them to relate to, and it's easier for them to have an opinion and a dialogue about it because it's something which is more real to them. Going forward, though, we actually have used books, just like Afua mentioned, of Journey to Joburg, where they actually now will start to get an understanding of what apartheid was, at what time it was, what political climate was there, and also within those books there's themes of the economics around it, and it gives the children a more simplistic view of what was going on, how it affected people, and the overall bigger picture. So it does give a holistic approach using books from American authors, but also books from African authors as well, and then combining them together.
Are some of these books, or do you mix some of these books that you read between fictional work and some true stories, or is it just fiction? And how do we, to a certain extent, I mean, I've got this sense that you're doing an extremely important job in society in terms of you're not just taking kids away from the street by keeping them reading a book, preparing to come to the club, but also then taking them to the club. But you're also, in my view, giving them an opportunity to reflect about the world beyond just themselves and computer and video games, which I think is important in our age. But I'm wondering whether or not you find that there is value, additional value in trying to look at both true and fictional stories. I mean, maybe biographies, or maybe it's a question of the ages of the young people you're working with, whether they are at that stage or not. Because I think that might, yeah.
I mean, again, John has to respond, and I'll respond because I work with the younger children.
Okay.
And for the younger children, we have focused on folk tales and fiction. I think there is some interest in the older primary school kids to engage with non-fiction books, and we're going to do that, but then we need to balance it right, because some of the non-fiction they want to read will be appropriate for year 6, but not necessarily for year 3. But so that's how we've been working with the younger children, is very much fiction, but I don't see why we can't move beyond fiction. But for the older secondary school children, it's been quite different, isn't it?
Although the books are fictional, they're based on historical events that have actually happened in America and Africa, so there is a real context within the books. Moving forward, the next book that we're actually going on to is actually a non-fictional book. So that will deal and dive into issues that actually are within Britain and Black British history. So that gives us a different dynamic of moving from an American author to African author to a Black British author.
I'm wondering whether you do get a sense of how important this is to a place like Sheffield. I mean, I've been doing some work around the importance of one's ethnic and cultural background to developing an identity with which to carry oneself into community. And it seems to me as though part of what you're doing here builds into that these young people have a base created partly by reading or engaging with literature that they can identify with.
Yeah, absolutely. I should say, first of all, it's not only for Black children or African children. It is what we have at the moment, but that certainly was not the intention behind it. And I think, John would agree with me that we are open to other groups of children as well. But for the African children who are in the group, this is really important, because really what they see outside, at school and the media, the very negative perceptions of the continent that their parents come from, or that they themselves were born in and migrated to the UK from. And that has an impact on well-being. It has an impact on self-esteem and your confidence. Even as adults, these things, when we keep hearing persistent and repeated negative images of the continent that we come from, it affects our well-being. It affects our confidence and our self-esteem. So imagine if as adults we feel that way, what is it like for teenagers who are growing up in the society, and they go to school and they hear negative things about sub-Saharan Africa, or they switch on the news, or a movie which then depicts sub-Saharan Africa in a very negative way. These are repeated. It's like an onslaught sometimes, and so and it does affect. I think it affects well-being, I would say, and if you're not careful, that well-being, that negative impact on well-being will continue into adulthood, and we have huge problems with mental health in Black communities in the UK. And I don't know, I haven't done the research, I can't say, but we do have to wonder whether some of this causes that, if you see what I mean. So we hope that, engaging with some of these stories, having these discussions, will make them feel a bit more confident about where they come from, a bit prouder about sub-Saharan Africa and the contributions that it's made in its intellectual dimensions, in its historical dimensions, in its literary dimensions, and its cultural dimensions to society, even at the global level.
Okay. John, I think you can respond to add to that if you like. But what I was going to ask is just how, Afua just talked about how you would welcome other communities. I'm wondering, what would they benefit? What would they get from an Afrocentric kind of reading? Is this some kind of community cohesion, or?
What I feel they'll be able to gain is they get to see a different perspective that they would not usually get to see, and they'll get to see some things in a historical context from a different point of view. So generally within schools you learn about British history and English history, and you would never hear of anything of the African reality or anything of the African history. So it gives you that balance where you're getting a history from this point of view and history of that point of view. Also as well, a lot of things within these fictional books are very interesting that will intrigue any child, and it'll get children thinking, speaking, and wanting to read more.
Now, tell me, which one is your favorite book of the ones you've read? Which one have you read?
Well, My sister's told me about this one.
Yeah.
My brother's told me about
What is this one? The Hate You Give?
Yeah. I know a little bit of it, and I've watched a little bit of it.
Okay, tell me what you've learned, or what do you know about it?
She kind of has two places, moved to a new school, and got new people, and then seen her best friend die, and I think it's something like that.
Okay, yeah. Have you read any other one?
Not about these, but I've read some other ones that I know about.
Have you been to the club?
Yeah, she's been twice. She read the folk tales, and we don't have the books of the folk tales, but she read the folk tales, didn't you? And then you read some of the other side of the truth.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me, going to the club, what have you liked about it?
I've actually liked a lot of things. I think that it's not like school, because in school they'll just make us do something like read a book and then do nothing with the book. But then here they make us discuss the book and then do things with the book and learn more about the book than just reading it and putting it and getting another book. They actually learn about it and then move on to another book.
Okay, that sounds like you're doing some interesting work. Now, let me get back to anyone can come in here on this, and I'm going to take you to an uncomfortable zone.
Yeah.
It's about the part of what I think is at the heart of your thought around setting up the club. We're talking about positive images of sub-Saharan Africa, but there are a lot of not so good images of that place. How do you? Yeah. I mean, I'm wondering whether or not trying to paint these positive images may, at some point, come face to face with the truth, and then confuse the children. Yeah. Like, okay, what was that we've been learning all along?
We're trying to. I think what I would say is that we're trying to present holistic images, so realistic images. That yes, we're not denying the difficulties, the challenges. They're there. We're not shying away from those. And if they come up in the books, like they came up in the Journey to Joburg, certainly that is definitely there. Then we confront them. But what we also want them to do is that we want them to have a balanced view. Okay. So we want to, in addition to those negative things, let's also see the other aspects, which are a bit more positive. And that's what we're trying to do. So what I would say is that we're trying to present a realistic image. We're trying to show Africa in its comprehensive perspective.
So you will include any?
Yeah, they even come up in the books. For example, The Other Side of the Truth. It's about migration from Nigeria to the UK, children who saw their mother being shot because their father was a journalist, and then they had to leave the same day to come to the UK, and they had to use a stranger who had to use her children's passports to get them into the UK, and then they were left alone at Victoria Station, and anyway, they got found by the police, etc., etc. It really shows you the challenges facing the Nigeria. This is in the 1990s during, I think, Abacha's regime, and the dangers to people, and so that came up there, and the fact that people had to flee. So they encountered it in that book. Yeah.
Look, I've run out of time here, but John, let's talk about how any important messages you like to leave the people with, and about this club, and what the projections are. How do you hope to go forward?
I feel like this is a great club. It's a club where children can find their own voice. It's a club where children can also discover one's purpose. What I would say to the people out there is that go and get a book which is out of your comfort zone, which is out a little bit different. Have a read of it and see what that could bring to your children, because they might read something and see something in a different light that can invigorate something that might not possibly have been in them. So what we're trying to do as well is also go into schools and give these books to different schools so they can use these resources as well.
Fantastic. And if people wanted to get in touch, how would they do this?
As I said, we're a very new community interest company. We run our book club in the Basil Griffith Library in Sadaka. We don't have a website or anything like that, so if anybody wants to get in touch, I would say they should contact the Basil Griffith Library, and through John and other members of the library, they'll be able to join the book club.
Well, look, it's been nice to have you here, and thank you for coming. It's Sheffield Live African Voices. We've been talking about True Talk Africa this week. We will see you next week. Thank you very much.